So today we're going to be talking about a recipe. You've chosen cornbread. Why did you choose that recipe?
Well, when you ask, you wanted to know something that my family had done for years, and cornbread is one of the breads that I think that my mom, growing up, she probably made it once a week. Both my parents were born in Mississippi. I was born in Alabama, and I grew up with all families from that tradition. And they did not have regular breads like yeasted bread, that what you grew up on, sort of sourdough breads or cornbread was the thing that they made. And it's a quick yeast. I mean, it's a quick bread. So you basically just mix it up, put it in the oven. There's no rising. And my mom grew up making this, and I'm sure that both families, when I would go to their houses, they made cornbread. That was the bread. Age-wise, I'd also say my parents were both born. My father was born 1925, my mother 1933. So they both grew up through the Depression. So that's the time period.
When was the first time you made cornbread?
Well, I'm not completely sure about that, but I was pretty young because my mom, I think about middle school or high school, she worked as a substitute teacher. And so some days she would not be getting home she would dole out chores for us to do while she was coming to help with dinner. And I remember her saying, all right, I need you to make cornbread. And so there would be a bowl sitting there on the counter with cornmeal in it, and I had to break an egg into it and add buttermilk and mix it up and then and prepare it. But that was probably, 11, 12.
Great. How is that? I mean, it's obviously different, but how is it different than how you make it now, or what has changed since you've learned more about making cornbread?
Well, a couple things. So when I moved away from the house and went to make cornbread, I realized when you go to actually buy the ingredients, I actually don't know what my mom had done now at that point, but you don't just put an egg and buttermilk into cornmeal. So either she was using self-rising cornmeal, or she had already put in baking powder, baking soda, and salt. So there was something in the mix that had already been done. So I learned those things, and I don't tend to buy self-rising stuff. So you'll see when I actually bake it for you that I'm going to be adding those ingredients. I'll measure those out. The other thing I'll say that has changed a little bit is as I had kids, what my parents grew up eating. Again, I only knew that there was one kind of cornbread, and then I got a cookbook when we got married from Bill Nill. He's a guy from Chapel Hill who La Residence, Cook's Corner. And it's a history book as well as a collection of recipes, and he's probably got 10 or 11 different cornbread recipes. And the kind of cornbread that my mom makes is Appalachian style. So it's bare bones, it's just the cornmeal, the egg, and the milk or buttermilk. Whereas there are other kinds that will use a lot more butter, or they'll use sugar, or they'll use more eggs, and there are all these different variants. Now, you as kids, you like this variety. You slather it with butter and honey, but I've also made some other varieties that are a little bit more cake-like. So it's a mix of flour and cornmeal. But growing up, I think on the farm, and my parents, they didn't necessarily have a lot of flour, so they would have just used the cornmeal. The
Right.
other interesting thing that I've noticed is, and I brought some props here. A lot of times this would be what you would bake cornbread. Just as a pan, you put your batter in like that. My mom always made cornbread in a flat griddle, which makes it you literally cook it on top of the stove to brown it on the bottom first, and then you put it in the stove, which is, Bill Neal talks about that, but that's not what everybody does. Some people just put it into a grease pan and throw it in the oven. And it depends on how thick you get it, and is it more cake-like. Mine is more like a fluffy, flat pancake.
So when and how did you decide that it was something you wanted to make for your kids?
I'm not sure it was a decision. I already made cornbread. I cook. When I moved out of college and started living on my own, I have always cooked on my own. I've actually progressed quite a bit I bake a lot of bread. In fact, y'all grow up eating most of the bread you've had has been baked in the house. I bake sourdough bread once a week or so. So cornbread is something I just regularly make, and generally there are certain meals that we would have, cornbread and chili, cornbread and soup. So obviously it is something that I wanted you guys to have because it's part of your heritage, I guess. All right, so, and I have done this often enough that generally I can come in, I turn on the oven, I turn it to 400, and I take the skillet out. I put the skillet on and add oil to start getting that hot. One interesting note in ingredients. My mom would have done this with bacon fat, which is what I grew up making, and I have switched to olive oil. It's a little healthier. I'm putting in 1.5 cups of cornmeal. I'm going to use the measuring spoons to use 1 full tablespoon of baking powder. And if I was using milk, I wouldn't need anything else. But since I'm using buttermilk, I'm going to use a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, which counteracts the sourness of the buttermilk. And then finally a little bit of salt, and I'll use about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Your normal amount of buttermilk you put in for that amount is going to be about a 1.25 cups. You'll see I don't measure it, but that'll be roughly what it is. So I put in 1 egg. And now we'll just start mixing it up. There's not much special here going on other than just getting and mixing it to the right consistency. Obviously, if you measured a 1.25 cups out, you could just pour it all in, mix it, and be done. I'm going to cook it on the top of the stove, which is, again, not normal. So I've heated the oil up, and that's going to give it a little bit of a brown. And you'll see when at the very end, it just makes the top of it a very nice crusty consistency. Okay, so there's the oil. I will typically take any extra oil and just add it in. It's not a necessary step, but if you have too much oil in your pan, then it'll run over the side. I'm mixing that extra oil into the batter. And typically at this point, what I want to wait for is the oil to be hot enough that I get a good crust when I put it down. The way you can tell that is just for it to be smoking. And I had not turned on the heat hot enough, so we had to wait a little bit here. But you'll know you have it at the right temperature if you get a nice little sizzle, which I don't know if you can hear that when you pour it in, but we did get a sizzle on this. So now I'm pouring the batter out. And yeah, I've got the pan there that I'm just going to put it underneath in case it were to run over. So then you leave it in there for 10 minutes, 12 minutes. It's getting brown a little bit. I like it to be a little bit better brown, and it was always it. My mom also liked it a crusty brown, and sometimes she would turn on the broil, which we've done. We always turned it upside down, and that's how my mom would serve it. You slice into that top. Okay, see the steam coming off. Butter. And last little bit of butter on there. Ready to melt. And now you want me to have a bite? Mm-hmm. All right, you're gonna have a problem when you come up because there's things in the way, but you ready? Good cornbread.